My name is Ashley Lambert, 28 years old. The string quartet played softly in the background as I adjusted the simple navy dress I'd chosen for my cousin Emma's wedding. The fabric caught the light just enough to look elegant, without drawing attention, something I'd perfected over the years. I never wanted to stand out, not in this family, not when the price of attention had always been comparison. The reception hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the kind that seemed designed to make everyone look wealthier than they were. My father, Robert Lambert, stood near the champagne fountain in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, surrounded by business associates who laughed a little too loudly at his stories. At 58, he exuded command, the kind of confidence that came from decades of power and the assumption that everyone in the room wanted something from him. My mother. Patricia mirrored his perfection. She floated through conversations, wine glass in hand, her smile sharp as glass. She didn't drink much. She performed it. Even her laugh was measured, elegant, and utterly exhausting to listen to. I spotted my brother Marcus, 35 already, a few drinks deep and radiating arrogance. His wife Christina, dressed in something that screamed old money, clung to his arm like an accessory. Together they looked like a stock photo for successful couple. Alex, Marcus said, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He always used that nickname, the one he knew I hated. Surprised you showed up. Thought you'd be too busy with your little computer project. I met his smirk with a calm smile. Wouldn't miss Emma's big day. Christina's laugh was light but cutting. Marcus told me you're doing something in tech. How interesting. Her tone lingered on the word interesting, like she was complimenting a child's finger painting. Is it profitable? Before I could respond, Victoria appeared. Our sister, 32, immaculate as always, in a champagne gown that matched her ambition. Are we talking about Alex's hobby? She asked, voice sugar-coated with disdain. Mom mentioned you're still living in that tiny apartment downtown. When are you going to find a real career? Their words washed over me like they always did. Years of practice made it easy to hide the sting. Ever since I turned down the consulting position Dad secured for me at McKinsey, the family had treated my choices as an ongoing disappointment. They couldn't fathom why anyone would trade prestige for purpose, salary for science, control for freedom. But what they didn't know was that my little project had become Quantum Dynamics, a company whose breakthroughs in quantum error correction were reshaping the future of computing. 3 months ago, I'd been on the cover of Forbes as one of the 30 under 30 visionaries reshaping technology. And just last week, Microsoft had finalized a $2.8 billion acquisition offer. I took a sip of wine, hiding a small smile. They had no idea. Marcus smirked again. You look tired. Still burning through savings. Doing well, I said simply. He laughed. Living paycheck to paycheck in a shoebox apartment isn't what I'd call doing well. I almost told him about the penthouse. Almost. But no, what good would it do? They would only translate success into validation for themselves. I'd spent years learning that the moment I handed them proof, they'd find a new way to take credit for it. A hush fell over our little circle as Dad approached that booming voice of his, parting the air. Jonathan, he said, gesturing proudly to a distinguished older man, beside him Jonathan Peaton, CEO of Meridian Industries and Dad's ultimate boss. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. This is my youngest daughter, Ashley. She works in, some tech thing. She's still figuring it out. A ripple of polite laughter followed. My stomach twisted, but I smiled anyway. Jonathan extended his hand warmly. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Lambert. The pleasure's mine, sir. His gaze lingered for a moment, thoughtful. He looked like he was trying to place me. I wondered if he'd seen the Forbes issue. Dad kept talking proudly, introducing Marcus and Victoria, the real successes of the family. I drifted inward, letting their voices fade into the background hum of violins and chatter. Through the ballroom windows, city lights flickered tiny constellations of possibility. Somewhere out there, my research team was celebrating the acquisition deal, unaware that their CEO was standing here pretending to be still figuring it out. My thoughts were interrupted by a champagne glass clinking. Emma the bride laughed on stage, radiant and oblivious to the quiet war in the corner of the room. Dad's voice carried again, this time louder, boasting about quarterly profits to anyone who'd listen. He gestured dramatically, the crowd nodding like disciples. I caught Mom's eyes from across the room. She gave me that subtle look that said, "Try to blend in. Don't embarrass us." I lowered my gaze and took another sip of wine. Sometimes invisibility was safer. Still, something in me stirred tonight. A quiet defiance. I could feel a shift coming like static before a storm. I didn't know yet that this wedding would become the stage for my family's reckoning, and that before the night ended, the words disappointing daughter would turn into the sharpest irony of all. Jonathan Piton's handshake lingered a moment longer than expected, his brow furrowing in quiet recognition. Lambert, he murmured. That name sounds familiar. Dad, sensing the flicker of curiosity, puffed up proudly. Robert Lambert, Senior Vice President of Operations at Meridian. You might recall my report from last quarter's supply expansion. Jonathan smiled politely but didn't take the bait. His eyes were still on me. And you, Ashley, what did your father say you do? Something in technology. Dad chuckled, the sound brittle and performative. A little side project. She's always been a dreamer, you know. Brilliant mind, but too idealistic. Not much of a business sense. The laughter from his colleagues followed like an echo. I'd heard versions of it my whole life. The soft ridicule of people who confuse ambition with delusion. Jonathan tilted his head. What kind of technology? Before I could answer, Marcus cut in smoothly, clearly enjoying himself. Oh, it's complicated, Jonathan. Something about quantum something. None of us really understand it. Christina giggled on cue. She's modest, too. I'm sure she's the next Einstein. Their sarcasm rolled through the air like cigarette smoke, thin, toxic, and suffocating. I smiled faintly. Quantum error correction, actually. Jonathan froze. The background music, a romantic violin waltz, suddenly seemed absurdly out of place. His eyes sharpened with interest. Did you say quantum error correction? Dad blinked, startled by the shift in tone. Yes, that's what she calls it. Some theoretical computer thing. Jonathan reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, tapping a search. Lambert, he muttered, scrolling through an app. Then his expression changed. First disbelief, then dawning recognition, then outright shock. He turned the screen toward my father. Robert, is this your daughter? Dad frowned, leaning closer. The light from the phone illuminated my face on the cover of Forbes magazine, standing before a blackboard filled with glowing quantum equations. The headline read, Dr. Ashley Lambert, the 28-year-old, who solved quantum computing's biggest problem. Silence detonated through the group. Marcus's champagne glass stopped midair. Victoria's painted lips parted, but no sound came out. Even Christina looked as if she'd swallowed her own words. Dad's color drained away, replaced by the gray of someone watching his world tilt. That can't be right. Jonathan ignored him, reading aloud from the article. Dr. Lambert's company, Quantum Dynamics, has developed a breakthrough in quantum error correction that experts are calling the most significant advancement since the microprocessor. Microsoft has reportedly offered $2.8 billion for acquisition. He looked up slowly, eyes wide with genuine awe. You're the one who cracked the coherence issue, I nodded, among other things. A ripple of gasps followed. Jonathan laughed, shaking his head. My God. Robert, do you understand what that means? Your daughter has changed the entire landscape of computational physics. Her algorithm could transform artificial intelligence, climate modeling, even medical research. Dad's mouth opened, but no words came out. The man who always had something to say, some boast, some command, was struck speechless. Marcus finally spoke, voice trembling. Alex, you never said anything about being successful. I turned to him with a calmness that felt almost cruel. You never asked. You just assumed. Victoria blinked rapidly, trying to recover her composure. The article, when was it published? 3 weeks ago, Jonathan answered. Right before Microsoft's press release. Christina made a small choking sound, hand at her throat. 2.8 billion chum. Mom appeared at Dad's side, drawn by the sudden commotion. Her smile was tense, her voice high-pitched, with performative cheer. What's all this about? Jonathan turned to her warmly. Patricia, your daughter is remarkable, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Her research is about to revolutionize the tech world. Mom's hand faltered on her wine glass. Billionaire. Dad swallowed hard. There must be a mistake. She drives a Honda. I exhaled softly. Reliable transportation doesn't define success, Dad. I live simply because I choose to. A nearby table went quiet. Wedding guests were now pretending not to listen. Emma, radiant in her gown, paused mid-conversation, her eyes flicking toward us in curiosity. Jonathan continued scrolling through the article. Dr. Lambert founded quantum dynamics in near total secrecy, choosing to build her company independently rather than surrender control to investors. He stopped smiling at me. That's admirable. Independence at this scale is rare. I felt the faintest warmth rise in my chest. Thank you. He turned to Dad again. Robert, you should be proud. Your daughter isn't just brilliant, she's reshaping industries. Dad's throat worked as he tried to respond. I didn't know. I met his eyes evenly. Because you never asked. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jonathan slipped his phone back into his pocket. Dr. Lambert, I would be honored to discuss potential collaboration between quantum dynamics and Meridian. Our company could benefit greatly from quantum optimization. I smiled politely. I'd be happy to explore that. Though after the acquisition closes, you'll need to coordinate with Microsoft's partnerships division. Jonathan's smile widened. Of course. He handed me his business card before turning back to Dad. Robert, I'll expect a full briefing on this conversation at our next board meeting. And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind an echoing silence heavy enough to crush marble. Marcus set his glass down with a trembling hand. $2 billion, he whispered. You're worth $2 billion. Mom's face crumpled in disbelief. But you live in that small apartment. You wear... She gestured vaguely at my dress. You don't even look rich. I never cared to, I said. Across the room, whispers were spreading like wildfire. A photographer snapped a picture. Someone muttered the word Forbes. My father's jaw tightened. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, not just shame, but fear. His boss had seen him humiliate the daughter, who could now make or break corporate deals with a signature. The string quartet played on oblivious. Dad looked at me finally, speaking in a hollow voice. Ashley, we're proud of you. It sounded like a lie, like a man rehearsing a line he didn't believe yet. I met his gaze steadily. Are you? Or are you just shocked that the daughter you dismissed is now worth more than your entire company? The color drained from his face again. Somewhere nearby, the wedding coordinator announced the cake cutting. Laughter returned to the room, faint and distant, but our little circle stood frozen in a silence that was anything but celebratory. For the first time in my life, my father couldn't control the narrative. And I realized he wasn't angry because I'd succeeded. He was terrified because I'd done it without him. The air in the reception hall felt different now, denser, heavier, charged with unspoken judgment. Conversations resumed around us, but people kept glancing our way, pretending to sip champagne while eavesdropping. The string quartet played the same cheerful waltz, yet the sound seemed hollow mocking. Dad stood frozen, face pale and stiff. He'd built his entire identity on control of his company, of his reputation, of his family. And in one evening, that carefully constructed image had shattered under the weight of a single truth. Jonathan's words still hung between us like a ghost. Your daughter is one of the most important scientists of our generation. Marcus was the first to break the silence. So wait, you're that Ashley Lambert? The one Forbes called the quantum prodigy? I didn't answer immediately. I could feel everyone's eyes on me waiting for confirmation, like witnesses at an execution. That's what they wrote, I said finally. Christina's laugh was shaky, desperate. $2 billion, and you still take the subway. I like the quiet, I replied softly. It's where I think best. Victoria's voice cut in sharp with barely contained envy. You said the acquisition was $2.8 billion. What's your share of that? 73%. Her perfectly composed smile faltered. So you're worth over $2 billion. I nodded. The number didn't impress me. It never had. But to them, it was everything. Money had always been their love language, their scoreboard for validation. Mom set down her wine glass with a trembling hand. Why didn't you tell us? We've been worried sick, thinking you were struggling. I looked at her, worried or embarrassed. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Robert finally found his voice, though it came out strained. You let us believe you were barely getting by. I turned to him slowly. I let you believe what you wanted to. You preferred the story where I was the failure. It fit your narrative better. He flinched like the words had struck him. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair, Alex. Don't, I interrupted, my tone calm but sharp. Don't call me Alex. He stopped, startled. Victoria crossed her arms. Fine, Ashley. But do you know how this makes us look? Dad introduced you as his disappointing daughter in front of the CEO. I felt a slow, dangerous smile rise. Then maybe next time he'll choose his words more carefully. Mom's composure finally cracked. That's enough. This is a wedding, not one of your science conferences. I looked around at them, this polished, perfect family, unraveling under the weight of their own arrogance. Exactly. It's Emma's wedding. And yet here we are making it about appearances again. Across the hall, Emma caught my eye briefly. There was no anger in her face, only surprise and maybe something else. Respect, perhaps? Jonathan's earlier words echoed in my mind. Her work will change the world. Dad turned away, rubbing his temples. I could see it, the shame, the humiliation of being publicly exposed as the man who couldn't recognize brilliance under his own roof. The man who'd spent years dismissing his youngest daughter's hobby, only to learn she was outpacing him by entire industries. He whispered something under his breath. I caught only fragments. Can't be real. My daughter. Mom reached for him, but he shrugged her off. Do you realize what this means, Patricia? He hissed. Jonathan saw everything. The board will know by Monday. I'll be the executive who called a billionaire genius a disappointment. The words weren't meant for me, but they hit just the same. Not a flicker of remorse for the years of dismissal, just fear of professional fallout. Typical. I turned back to the table feeling something inside me tighten. You're worried about your reputation, not about how you've treated me. He froze, looking at me as if I'd slapped him. You think this is about you being embarrassed in front of your boss. Dad, I spent years trying to make you proud. Years you spent telling me that success meant suits, salaries, and subordination. The moment I stepped outside that formula, you stopped seeing me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the quartet had switched to a slower, almost mournful melody. Marcus finally spoke again, quieter this time. Ashley, we didn't know. We just thought that I was lost. I finished for him. That's the part that hurts the most. Not that you underestimated me, but that you were never curious enough to ask what I was really building. Victoria's lips tightened. So what now? You've made your point. You've humiliated Dad in front of everyone. I didn't humiliate anyone, I said. He did that himself. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Mom tried to gather what little dignity remained. Family should stick together, Ashley. You could have shared this with us privately. I met her eyes. You could have listened to me publicly. The words landed like a verdict. She turned away, tears glinting in her eyes, not of guilt, but frustration at losing control. Dad still hadn't moved. His hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. I could almost see the war happening behind his eyes. Pride versus regret, control versus collapse. And then quietly he said the one thing I never expected. I don't even know who you are anymore. I felt something twist inside me. I'd imagined this confrontation for years, how I'd feel if he finally saw me for what I'd become. But I hadn't imagined this kind of hollow ache. That's because you never tried to know me, I said softly. He looked up, eyes glassy, and for the first time in my life, my father didn't look powerful. He looked small. Emma's laughter echoed faintly in the background as she cut her wedding cake, the photographer's flash bursting like fireworks. Around us, the celebration continued, but in our corner, a lifetime of unspoken resentments had finally erupted into the open. The man who once defined success by control had just watched his empire of image crumble at the hands of the daughter he'd tried to control the most. And beneath the shame in his eyes, I saw something raw and terrifyingly human fear. Not of losing status, but of losing me. Dad didn't say another word for several minutes. He just stood there, staring into the middle distance as if trying to calculate the damage. His reflection trembled faintly in the polished silver of the champagne fountain, his tuxedo still perfect, but his confidence visibly cracked. Mom's hand hovered near his arm, unsure whether to comfort or scold. Robert people are watching, she whispered. He blinked, snapping back to the moment. His eyes landed on me. Ashley. Can we not do this here? My tone stayed level, though my pulse was racing. We already did. You started it when you introduced me as your disappointment. That word hung between us heavy and ugly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I'd never seen him so lost. Not angry, not defensive, just unmoored. Mom stepped in, smoothing her voice into the diplomatic calm she used when hosting dinner parties. Sweetheart, your father didn't mean it that way. You know how he gets when he's nervous. Nervous, I let out a quiet laugh. He spent his life performing for men like Jonathan Peaton. You think he was nervous? He was proud until he realized I didn't fit into his definition of success. Victoria shot me a warning look. That's not fair, Ashley. I turned to her. No, what's not fair is being ridiculed for choosing purpose over prestige. You and Marcus could have asked about my work any time in the last 8 years. You didn't. You just assumed failure because it wasn't your kind of success. Marcus frowned, defensive, but not entirely sure why. We were just trying to look out for you. By treating me like a mistake to be corrected, the words came out sharper than I intended. But I didn't regret them. For years, I'd been silent while they narrated my life like it was an embarrassing side plot in their perfect family story. Tonight, the silence finally broke. Mom pressed her fingertips to her temple. Please not at the wedding. Then maybe you should have listened before the wedding, I said softly. Her composure, cracked eyes glistening. You think we haven't worried. You think it's easy for a mother to watch her daughter choose struggle over stability. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. You never worried about me struggling, Mom. You worried about me reflecting badly on you. There's a difference. The pain in her eyes flickered to anger. You've become cruel, Ashley. No, I whispered. Just honest. Dad finally looked up. His voice was quiet, brittle. I made mistakes. Marcus blinked. Dad. No, he said again louder this time. Let her speak. She's right. We didn't listen. The admission caught all of us off guard. Mom froze mid-breath. Victoria's posture stiffened. Dad exhaled heavily. I thought I was protecting you, he continued, guiding you toward something safe, respectable. I didn't understand what you were building, and instead of learning, I judged. I studied his face. His words weren't rehearsed this time. There was a tremor in them, something raw. I wanted to believe that control equals love, he went on. But maybe I was just afraid of being irrelevant in your world. Something inside me softened, but I wasn't ready to let him off so easily. You weren't afraid of being irrelevant, Dad. You were afraid I wouldn't need you. He closed his eyes, and for the first time I saw guilt, not performative, but real. Mom reached for his hand, her own voice cracking. Robert. He shook his head. She's right, Patricia. She always was. A strange quiet settled between us. Around us, the wedding carried on. Champagne poured, laughter rose and fell. The newlyweds twirled beneath soft lights, but in our small circle time stood still. Victoria cleared her throat, breaking the silence. So, what happens now? You've proven your point. You're successful. We're hypocrites. What more is there to say? I turned toward her, not angry anymore, just tired. It's not about proving a point. It's about finally being seen. Marcus looked at me, confusion softening into guilt. You know, I used to think you'd thrown your life away. Now I feel like I've been living in a cage this whole time, one Dad built for all of us. I nodded slowly, then step out of it. He half laughed, half sighed. Easier said than done. Everything worthwhile is. Dad straightened, squaring his shoulders as if remembering how to stand. I want to understand, he said quietly. Your work, your company, you. The sincerity in his tone surprised me. Then ask me questions, I said. Real ones, not assumptions disguised as advice. He nodded once solemnly. I will. For a moment, the tension loosened. Marcus picked up his glass again, drained what was left of the champagne. Well, he said awkwardly, that was the most productive family argument we've had in years. Victoria shot him a look, but even she couldn't hold back a small, reluctant smile. Emma's voice rang across the hall, calling for the family to join her for photos. I turned toward the sound, catching her eye. She gave me a subtle nod, a silent, you handled that well. As we followed the crowd toward the stage, Dad fell into step beside me. Ashley, he said softly, I know words aren't enough, but I am proud of you. I looked at him, uncertain if I could believe it yet. His expression wasn't the usual mask of politeness. It was weary, vulnerable, human. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like an act. Then start by proving it, I said gently. He nodded once, accepting that challenge without protest. The camera flashes went off as we reached the stage. My family and I stood together smiling for the picture, an image of unity that wasn't quite true, but wasn't entirely false either. Somewhere between broken and healing. Behind the forced smiles and glittering lights, a quiet truth lingered. This wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was the first step toward something that might one day resemble it. The wedding reception had thinned out. The band switched to slow, nostalgic jazz. Waiters cleared tables while the last guests danced lazily under dim, golden light. The earlier chaos had settled into a strange, fragile calm. My family and I stood near the far end of the hall, close enough to see the dance floor, but far enough to be left alone. The air between us felt fragile, like a porcelain vase glued back together, but still marked by the cracks. Mom was the first to break the silence. Ashley. She began carefully. I owe you an apology. Her tone was soft but cautious, as if testing the air for danger. For what I asked, though, I already knew. For not seeing you. For assuming the worst. You have to understand your father and I grew up believing success came in a certain package. Title, salary, respectability. When you walked away from that, it felt like She paused, searching for the word. Rejection. I studied her face. She looked smaller somehow, less like the poised socialite and more like a mother, trying to reconnect with a daughter she'd lost. It wasn't rejection, Mom, it was survival. I needed space to become myself. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I see that now. Marcus, standing beside her, shifted uncomfortably. For what it's worth, he said, voice low. I'm sorry, too. I used to think your choices made the rest of us look bad. Turns out they just made us look small. A faint smile tugged at my lips. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. He gave a short, nervous laugh. Don't get used to it. Even Victoria, usually unflappable, looked subdued. She was staring at the floor, arms crossed. You made us all look like fools tonight, she said finally. Then, after a long pause, added, but maybe we deserved it. That wasn't my intention, I replied quietly. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I just came to celebrate Emma's wedding and leave quietly like always. Victoria's head lifted slightly. Then why didn't you correct Dad when he called you disappointing? I met her gaze steadily. Because sometimes the truth reveals itself better when you stop defending it. She blinked as if trying to process the simplicity of that. Then, for the first time ever, she looked at me not with superiority, but with something close to admiration. Before she could respond, Jonathan Piton passed by, smiling warmly as he clapped Dad on the shoulder. Robert, I'll see you Monday. And congratulations on raising such an extraordinary daughter. Dad managed a stiff nod. Thank you, Jonathan. After the CEO disappeared into the crowd, Dad turned toward me. He wants to meet with me next week, he said, to discuss integrating your technology into Meridian's systems. I raised an eyebrow. So he's doing business with you now? He smiled weakly. With both of us, I hope. It was awkward, his attempt at humility, but I let it pass. There was a sincerity underneath it that hadn't existed before. Maybe, I said, but let's make sure it's collaboration, not control. He nodded, the lesson not lost on him. Emma appeared, then radiant and flushed from dancing. There you are. Everyone's been talking about you. I smiled. I noticed. She laughed, lowering her voice. You just made the entire Lambert family legend implode in one night. I don't know whether to thank you or build a bunker. Go with the bunker, I teased. Her eyes softened. Seriously, though, I'm proud of you. Always was. Her words landed differently. They weren't about money or status or Forbes covers. They were simple, human, real. When she left to rejoin her new husband, Dad leaned closer, his voice almost hesitant. Ashley, how did you keep it all a secret for so long? I took a deep breath, letting the memory wash over me, because every time I tried to share my progress, you told me to be realistic, so I stopped sharing. He winced. I suppose I deserve that. Yes, I said softly, but maybe now we can start a different story. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, there was no disappointment in his eyes, just humility. The band started playing a slow, delicate melody. Couples drifted to the dance floor. I turned to leave, but Dad hesitated. Would you dance with me? The question stunned me. I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me for anything, let alone something so human. For a moment, the child in me, the one who used to reach for his hand and be brushed aside, hesitated. Then I nodded. Okay. We stepped onto the dance floor. His movements were awkward, uncertain, as if he was learning to be a father all over again. You've changed, he said quietly. So have you, I replied. He chuckled softly. I'm still learning how to be proud without feeling replaced. I smiled faintly. You don't have to be replaced, Dad. Just present. That made him pause. He swallowed hard, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, relief, maybe even peace. When the song ended, he kissed my forehead lightly. I'm proud of you, Ashley. For real this time. And for the first time, I believed him. As I walked off the dance floor, the tension that had once strangled me began to loosen. The whispers, the judgment, the constant need to prove myself, it all started to fade. For years, I thought I wanted revenge. But standing there, surrounded by fragile reconciliation, I realized I'd been craving something else entirely: acknowledgement. And I'd finally earned it, not through wealth, but through truth. Still deep down, one question lingered. Like a shadow, could this new peace survive once the night ended? Or would morning bring old habits crawling back? The answer, I suspected, would come soon enough. By the time the last song faded, the wedding hall had emptied into a sea of flickering candlelight and half-finished glasses of champagne. The laughter was gone. Only the hum of tired conversations remained. I stood near the tall windows, watching the city lights glitter beyond the glass like distant constellations. Dad approached quietly, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. For once, he wasn't walking like a man on display, just a father unsure of his next step. "Ashley," he said softly. I turned. "You look like someone about to attend a board meeting with his conscience." He actually smiled at that small, hesitant but real. I deserve that. A pause hung between us. Then, in a tone I'd never heard from him before, he said, "I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight, but for years. For not seeing you. For thinking success meant control." His voice broke slightly on that last word. I nodded, not to dismiss him, but to show I was listening. "I know you thought you were protecting me, but sometimes the things we build to protect end up becoming the things that cage us." He exhaled slowly. "How do I make it right?" I hesitated, searching for the truth beneath my anger. "Start by believing in me," I said. "Especially when you don't understand what I'm doing. That's when it matters most." He nodded, eyes glistening under the chandelier's fading light. "Deal." For the first time in years, his word felt like a promise. Mom joined us a few minutes later. Her makeup slightly smudged, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Ashley, before you go, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took success for us to see what love should have seen first." I met her gaze. "Thank you, Mom." There was no sarcasm, no bitterness, just quiet acknowledgement, two women finally meeting halfway. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Lunch this week. I want to hear more about your work. Really hear it." Another from Victoria. "I read the Forbes article. I didn't realize quantum computing could change legal research. Want to talk sometime?" And one from Mom. "I'm sorry it took us this long to see you. Love you." I smiled, letting the warmth of those words settle somewhere deep and unexpected. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp, alive. My driver opened the car door, but before I stepped in, I glanced back through the glass walls of the ballroom. My family was still inside, silhouetted by the golden light, no longer perfect, but finally human. As the car pulled away, the city unfolded before me. Skyscrapers glowing like circuitry streets, humming with midnight possibility. I thought about the years I'd spent chasing recognition from the people who should have given it freely. But revenge, I realized, had never really been the point. The real victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was giving them the chance to finally see me right. My reflection in the car window overlapped with the skyline outside, one version of me fading into another. The quiet, overlooked daughter, the scientist, the woman who no longer needed permission to exist on her own terms. Tomorrow, I'd return to my penthouse, finalize the Microsoft acquisition, and keep building the technology that could change the world. But tonight, as the lights of the city blurred past, I allowed myself something simpler. Peace. Because sometimes the greatest revolution isn't scientific or financial. It's emotional when a family learns to love without conditions. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval. I was walking into the future with it.